Every single year, the same thing happens. Someone asks if you're watching the Super Bowl. You say no. And here's the thing. Your stomach doesn't drop. Your pulse doesn't spike. Your palms stay completely dry. Just nothing. Neutral silence where the excitement is supposed to be. And that silence, that's the part that apparently requires an explanation. Suddenly, you're being looked at like you just admitted you've never tried pizza. Like your entire personality is a malfunction. Nobody makes it weird that you skipped the World Series. But the Super Bowl carries this unspoken social contract. You're either in or you're quietly defective. So today, instead of asking what's wrong with people who don't care, we're going to ask what's actually happening inside the brains of people who do, and why those same mechanisms don't fire the same way for everyone. Because the answer is genuinely fascinating. And by the end, you'll understand why your neutrality makes other people more uncomfortable than it makes you. That part alone is worth staying for. Caring deeply about a sports team is not a default human setting. It's a learned response, and a surprisingly complex one. Here's the short version of human prehistory that matters. We survived as a species by forming tight tribal groups. Your group's success was your survival. So your brain developed deep circuitry for tracking in-group versus out-group dynamics. Circuitry that generates genuine emotional stakes around how your people perform against other people. Sports hijack that system almost perfectly. Your brain doesn't fully distinguish between my tribe defended its territory and the team I followed since childhood just scored. Researchers have a term for this, basking in reflected glory, where you absorb the emotional reward of someone else's victory simply because you've identified with their group. Your team wins and your brain releases dopamine even though you did nothing except exist on a couch in the right zip code. It's ancient hardware running a modern simulation, but that hardware requires installation. Years of exposure, emotional memories tied to the sport, social reinforcement from people who matter. A parent who watched every Sunday, a city whose identity wraps around its team, a childhood moment where the game meant something beyond the game. If that installation never happened, the trigger doesn't fire, not because something is broken, because the groundwork was never laid. And no amount of social pressure manufactures neurological architecture that simply isn't there. Research published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology found that people have dramatically different optimal stimulation levels. The amount of intensity a nervous system needs to feel engaged versus overwhelmed. Some brains are calibrated for high-intensity experiences. The crowd noise, the chaos, the momentum swings. For these people, that's not stress. That's what feeling alive feels like. Other brains hit their ceiling much faster. The same environment that feels electric to one person feels genuinely draining to another, not boring. Draining. There's an important difference. Psychologists have identified a trait called high sensitivity, present in roughly 1 in 5 people, where the nervous system processes information more deeply and reaches overwhelm more quickly. For someone high in this trait, a Super Bowl party isn't a celebration. It's a sustained assault. Noise, social performance, manufactured urgency, for 3 straight hours. They'll feel the effects the next day. That's not weakness. It's a different nervous system running a different calibration. Neither is superior. The problem is that mass culture was largely designed for people on the high stimulation end of the dial. So if you're not, you spend a lot of your life wondering why you don't feel what everyone else seems to feel. Psychologists describe something called locus of control, where a person tends to locate their sense of agency. People with a strong internal locus get their deepest satisfaction from effort producing a direct, traceable outcome. Their sense of meaning is tied to the loop. I did something. It caused something. Now think about what watching a football game actually asks of you. You pour real emotional energy, stress, hope, elation, despair, into an outcome you have zero influence over. The players don't know you exist. Your anxiety doesn't move the ball. You can wear the lucky jersey, hold your breath on fourth down, and none of it changes anything. Ever. Think of it like an emotional slot machine. You keep feeding in your energy, your nerves, your investment, and the payout is entirely random, entirely outside your control. For some people, that randomness is the thrill. The unpredictability is the whole point. But for people with a strong internal locus, that same machine feels like a drain. Their brain is quietly asking, why am I spending this on something I can't affect? That's not entertainment. That's stress without a return on investment. Neither wiring is wrong, but only one of them finds the slot machine fun by design. People also vary dramatically in their tolerance for uncertainty. Sports are structurally pure uncertainty. You never know what's going to happen. That's supposed to be the thrill. But suspense and anxiety are not as different as we'd like to think. They activate overlapping systems, the same threat anticipation circuits, similar cortisol patterns. Whether that activation feels exciting or uncomfortable depends on your baseline tolerance for ambiguity and what your nervous system has learned to associate with unresolved tension. For people with lower uncertainty tolerance, 3 hours of escalating, unresolved stakes in something with no bearing on their real life doesn't produce a thrill. It produces something closer to controlled suffering. They may actually be more affected by the tension than anyone in the room, just moved in the wrong direction. It's the same reason some people pay to sit through horror films and others physically can't. It isn't a courage gap. It's different nervous systems with different relationships to manufactured threat. Here's the part I find most psychologically revealing, and the most useful thing in this entire video. Notice how people react when you say you're not watching the Super Bowl. There's often a flash of something, not just surprise, but defensiveness. Like you've made a judgment rather than stated a preference. Sports function as identity infrastructure. Supporting a team isn't just leisure. It's tribal membership, a signal of shared values, a way of belonging to something larger than yourself. When you opt out, some people unconsciously register it as a rejection not of the game, but of the entire social structure it represents. Not the football. Them. There's also a quieter anxiety underneath it. Cultural rituals only hold their weight when enough people participate. Your indifference is a small structural threat to the ritual itself. And rituals are something human beings protect quite fiercely without fully realizing they're doing it. So next time someone reacts with that flash of defensiveness, you can silently recognize what's actually happening. They're not defending a sport. They're defending their sense of belonging. That's not something to argue with. It's something to understand. Here's your actual takeaway. Not just understanding, but something you can use. When someone questions you about not caring, you don't need to defend your wiring. Try this reframe. I'm not broken for not feeling this. They're not wrong for feeling it deeply. We're just running different software on the same hardware. That shift from something's wrong with me to we're differently calibrated is the difference between walking into Super Bowl Sunday feeling quietly defective and walking in feeling genuinely neutral. Not superior, not contrary, just fine. And if someone pushes back, you now know enough about tribal identity and ritual protection to understand what's actually driving that reaction. It has almost nothing to do with you. You can let them have it. That's not defeat. That's psychological clarity. If your brain genuinely doesn't respond to the Super Bowl, the real answer is almost certainly a combination of things. Maybe the tribal wiring never got trained onto football. Maybe your stimulation ceiling means the noise reads as exhausting rather than electric. Maybe the emotional slot machine doesn't pay out for you because your brain needs agency in the loop. Maybe uncertainty registers as anxiety rather than excitement in your nervous system. Or maybe you just don't like football. And that's the entire explanation with no psychology required. All of these are legitimate ways to be wired. None of them are deficiencies. What actually deserves scrutiny is the cultural assumption underneath the question. The idea that indifference to a sporting event requires a defense. That assumption, when you really look at it, is far stranger than anything it's trying to explain. You're not missing a chip. You're just running different software. And that's not something that needs fixing. That's just something worth understanding. If this hit something real for you, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find this. Subscribe so you don't miss next week's deep dive. We do this every week. And I want to hear from you. What's the thing you genuinely don't care about that everyone expects you to? Drop it below. I'll read every single one, and I'm pinning the best answer at the top. See you next week.